We all got some nice sweets and cookies and all that kind of stuff? A little sugar? Excellent. We have a little more sugar later, but that's a surprise, so I'll tell you about that later. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's been a terrific day, kicked off by the always excellent Governor O'Malley and his comments, which are always tremendous. And I'm just thrilled, as always, to be in a room of kindred spirits. So, and I think we should give a round of applause to Sarah and Ron and her entire team for what a fabulous day. And as we wrap up the day of really tremendous speakers, you know, Sarah and I, in consultation over the last few months, have been thinking about what we could do, and we wanted to do something a little bit different. So we organized this roundtable. And our goal for this afternoon, for the next hour and a half or so, is to emerge with some concrete ideas that can leverage the incredible knowledge and passion that exists in this room. In particular, to achieve the goals of this conference, which, as we all know, is achieving intelligent solutions for a sustainable future. Now, in addition, note that the results of this roundtable, this is not just an intellectual exercise. We are going to gather these and likely publish them. So you all be part of something that we want to extend beyond today. So to kick it off, I'd like to ask everyone here a question. How many of you, or who here, is happy with the current discourse about environmental and sustainability issues in society? Okay. This was not unexpected. That's good, because honestly, if all of you raised your hand, I would have been like, oh, crap. I have to tear up my entire speech. So that's a good thing. Now, it's incredibly frustrating, right, that we continue to fight the same battles over and over, and while it's easy to point fingers at others, I believe that those of us dealing with sustainability have to share some of the blame for the fact that the issues we care about have not made it into the mainstream concerns of a majority of voters. Because we haven't been listening, I would argue, to what matters to people most. Now, two trends were painfully clear during this last election, and not just here in the States, but in elections around the world. The first is the fear of mass migrations of people and the real or perceived threat it has on our security. One need only think about Syria, which Governor O'Malley spoke about this morning, for an example of the impact that 1 million people have had on elections around the world. The second is the economy. And when I say economy, I mean it in the simplest of terms. I mean it in the terms of how a society provides purpose and meaning to its people. I really appreciated Governor O'Malley's comments when he said there's no more yearning than the yearning for a decent job. A 10% gain in the Dow and Jones Industrial Average, record corporate profits, none of that means anything to the average person if they feel like their ability to provide for their family and the fundamental dignity that results from that ability is being threatened. So those two factors are not the only, but primary contributors to the populist backlash against the global liberal democratic order that has brought us the longest period of human peace and the greatest reduction of poverty in the history of humanity. Now, you see, people want dignity, they want purpose, and they want security for themselves and their families. And if they don't have that, all the talk of climate change and pictures of polar bears and blue whales and elephants don't matter. Now, don't get me wrong, right? The other side has a lot to answer for as well. They haven't been listening. They've been willfully ignoring the science that is subject to the same rigors that have led to medical breakthroughs and technological breakthroughs that they don't question. But we can't control them. We can only control ourselves. And every one of us in this room knows that what we do, green technology, green energy, sustainability, smart cities, all of these things are key to building that more secure and prosperous future. Yet, and I've had a discussion about this with several of you last night at dinner, looking at you, Ingrid, Governor O'Malley, Sarah, of course, and many others, that lamenting the fact that none of these issues Environmental issues didn't come up in any of the presidential debates. Climate change, sustainability. Honestly, I felt like, personally, I felt like I had my ass handed to me the last few months. We had all this hope. We had all this opportunity. We really believed we had the momentum, and then the rug was pulled out from underneath us. Now, while direct mail campaigns of melting glaciers and birds choking on plastic that may appeal to a small core audience, it's not growing the constituency. And again, our tendency, as Governor O'Malley again put it, to catastrophize things like climate change, make the deniers look like the optimists. And everybody wants optimism. Opportunity and growth have been two things that have driven the growth of our country. Unfortunately, those have historically coincided and been driven by environmental degradation. Indeed, the foundation of the growth of this nation has been based on the destruction of our environment. Think about, for example, New York. 150 square miles of water and wetlands have been reclaimed in New York over the past 300 years. What do wetlands do? Nurture life. Who said that? Protect coastlines. And nurture life is absolutely 100% correct as well. There's a lot of things they do, of course. But protect coastlines. Who said that? That was what I was looking for. Protect coastlines. We all remember Hurricane Sandy, of course. And that storm, actually, if you look at the historical record, was not an anomaly. What was unusual that it had been that long since such an extreme storm had hit New York and New Jersey. Sandy caused about 9 feet of storm surge, which flooded almost 20% of New York, with a cost of over $70 billion. Now, most of the people impacted were from poor and moderate income neighborhoods, and half the people who died on Staten Island were living on land that was once wetlands. So if mid-range predictions for sea level rise in New York are accurate, the next Hurricane Sandy will cause destruction on a scale that we can hardly imagine. The growth and development of New York was fundamentally based on destroying the environment in that city, filling in those wetlands, and decimating the ability of the environment to protect us from the environment. And now we pay the price. And that's just one example. I mean, Florida, of course. Hello, we're here. Octopus crawling around in parking garages. Bangladesh. All over the world. The environmental destruction we have wrought has made us vulnerable. And make no mistake, as you've heard many times today, sea level rise, drought, famine, climate change, etc., will displace many more millions of people, threatening entire nations. I mentioned earlier the 1 million people migrating out of Syria and how that has destabilized the global order. What happens when it's 10 million people? What happens when it's 100 million people fleeing Southeast Asia, fleeing Africa, fleeing Latin America? What happens then? This is just the tip of the iceberg. And all of this is happening in the context of a world whose population is exploding. I like to think about it in these terms. In 0 AD, there were 200 to 300 million people on this planet, 2,000 years ago. When my grandfather was born in 1910, there were 1.6 billion people on this planet. 100 years later, so 2,000 years to go from 200 or 300 million to 1.6 billion, 100 years to go to 7 billion. Don't we just like stock portfolios would look like that. That's a hell of a curve. And now in the next 30 years, another 2 billion. So we are facing these challenges in the context of threats that humanity has never had to face before. We are not equipped. We are equipped to deal with famine and war. We are not equipped with the challenges that we're facing if we think historically. Now, it doesn't take a math genius to realize this, right? It's not rhetoric, it's not alarmism, it's simple arithmetic. And if you consider that the World Wildlife Fund estimates that each year this planet consumes 1.5 times the amount of resources we can sustainably renew, we have a problem. It's like a farmer eating his seed. I would say in the modern world it's very hard actually to find certainty. But one thing is crystal clear. We are sitting on a powder keg. So the question is, how do we grow our capitalist democratic system not by destroying the environment, but by renewing the environment? By creating a healthier world for our children and achieving the security and opportunity that people deserve everywhere. And I'm an optimist, so you have to be in this business. And I believe that those kinds of solutions genuinely come from the people like you in this room. 10 years ago, when I started to get involved in the green building movement, people generally associate I spend my life swimming in the ocean with whales and dolphins, and only come ashore to do events like this. It's not true. I always looked for innovation and opportunity, and the green building movement has always fascinated me. The opportunity to look at how we live, where we live, how we travel, what we eat. Those are the fundamental elements of life. And if we don't solve those problems, we won't solve the bigger issues. And that's why I've been fascinated for so long and been involved in the green building movement for over a decade now. And it's what brings me here today and to the discussion that Sarah and I had when we were trying to think about how we could engage you all in a conversation, because that's really what interests me, in leveraging the incredible talent that has come together in this room to start thinking about solving these problems in the context of these big issues that are clearly driving the geopolitics of the world today. And not in your typical context of climate change and the environmental issues, but really in the issues that matter to people. And so that's the task that we have set for us today. The first is, how do we as a community solve these large-scale economic and human problems through the lens of the shared interest that we have of the themes that are on your tables? For example, as the next administration looks to find opportunity to provide jobs and growth, this is a perfect area for everyone to come together to make a positive difference. Say, for the lives of the steel workers and the coal miners we've heard so much about over the course of the election, who are looking for the same dignity and purpose that you and I seek every single day. And second, and this is crucial, how do we do a better job of selling our vision for a better world? Because clearly, we are not doing a good enough job to connect the dots between what we do and our vision and solving the problems that people really care about. Now, telling story, I consider myself first and foremost a storyteller, is oftentimes the hardest part. So as I was thinking about today, I came up with, actually along with my wife, we came up with 3 guidelines that we tend to use and fall back on whenever we look to tell story. So I wanted to share those with you before we dig in. The first one to think about always is selling your story. And I have an example here because there's so much that's competing for our attention, right? Can we throw the slides up? We won't play it yet, but we'll just throw it up there. Fantastic. So there's so much, obviously that's competing for our attention all the time. There's, when my grandfather had The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, came out in 1968, there were 4 channels on television. Now there's 4,000. So how do we compete with that? We have more power in our phones than the Apollo spacecrafts in our pockets. So how do we compete in a world that is drastically different than the world that he was operating in? This past summer, my wife and I produced and hosted the #1 special for Discovery Shark Week. It was actually the #1 special on cable that night. My mother was really excited because it beat Rizzoli and Isles, she's a big fan of that show. And I was like, it's the #1 show on Shark Week. She was like, that's great. And I was like, and it beat Rizzoli and Isles. She's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And the name of the show was, now, this show was not about radioactive sharks, okay? In fact, it was about a population of sharks that had rehabited the Bikini Islands in the Marshall Islands. which is, as some of you may know, where the United States conducted a great deal, predominantly, the predominant amount of our nuclear testing post-World War II. And it uncovered an illegal shark fishing and finning operation that was going on there. And, but I'll tell you, while the documentary was great, been nominated for awards, it's fantastic, but I know for a fact a lot of the people, including a lot of the press coverage that we got initially, were drawn because of this first impression. Nuclear sharks. Your title, your first impression, selling your story matters. So that's always critical when we sit down and think about how we tell stories, is how do we sell that story? What's that first impression like? Simple language is the key as well. Because like it or not, Donald Trump did this extremely well in his campaign, as did Bill Clinton. We can all remember, it's the economy, stupid. Simple phrases, simple ideas that resonate with people, for better or for worse. And we need to make sure that we're not talking over our audience, because as an industry, I'm afraid we tend to do that a lot. We will make people change the channel. Turn the page or click on a different story, and we don't want to do that. So how do we talk to our audience? How do we know our audience and speak to that audience? Because when that happens, you know, if people change the channel, all the exhaustive analysis and accuracy in the world won't matter if people aren't consuming. Of course, we have to be accurate, driven by science, but we also have to be telling compelling stories. And finally, the third lesson, the third rule that we kind of keep in our back pocket whenever we're working on projects, and we have a couple different TV shows we're doing now, and a scripted show with National Geographic and other things that we're doing, we are always thinking about humor. Humor matters, folks, because we have to tackle some heavy shit, right? I mean, I'm not going to mince words. We're all adults. From climate change to ocean acidification to the links between illegal wildlife trade and terrorism and human trafficking, this is some deep stuff. But humor is a key tool to inform people on these issues and not scare them away. We recently launched a series, and I brought the trailer to that to give you an example, with CNN's Great Big Story, CNN's new digital platform called The Aquatic World of Philippe Cousteau. And it's a completely different approach to telling these types of stories in a way that can appeal to a different and new audience. I'm not saying that we don't do documentaries or that we don't publish scientific papers. That's important. But we need to broaden the scope of how we talk about these issues and leverage the tools that exist in good storytelling if we're going to grow the constituency, because clearly we have to grow the constituency or these issues will never make the mainstream the way they need to be, and we will never achieve the change that we need to achieve. So humor matters. And is very, very important. So I encourage you all, because, you know, the old saying, when you cry alone, but when you laugh, the whole world laughs with you.